presentar mi profesor de California. Trabaja en el campo de Plant Physiology, que es fisiología de plantas, y más de chaparral, que te va a contar en un minuto. Yo estaba como alumno en su clase de Plant Fisiología, de fisiología de plantas, y trabajé en su laboratorio unos años. Y entonces también te presento a su esposa Janet, que era profesora también de matemáticas en California, y que me vinieron a visitar un poco de tiempo y trajeron un poco de California aquí. Entonces me siento muy orgullosa de estar aquí. Bueno, y ahora lo dejo a él.
Saludos desde Malibu, California, donde las olas suben, siempre está soleado y la temperatura permanece constante entre 22 y 24 grados. Como muchos de ustedes saben, hace unos años recibí a un español en la Victoria, Martín Venturas. Estoy muy agradecido que ahora podamos corresponder al alojar a una becada Fulbright, Natalia Aguirre, en su laboratorio. Gracias por darle la bienvenida como miembro de su comunidad científica. Voy a enfocar mi seminario hoy en el tema ambiental que nos está afectando a todos en la ecología vegetal y la silvicultura, el cambio climático, específicamente al aumento de los incendios forestales, la sequía y la muerte regresiva inducida por hongos. El tipo de vegetación dominante en el sur de California fue nombrado por los exploradores españoles en el siglo XIV como chaparral, un tipo de vegetación que les recordaba a chaparros, arbustos perennifoliosos cortos y densos que eran casi imposible de atravesar. Nuestro chaparral ahora se ve amenazado por el cambio climático, con una frecuencia de incendios cada vez mayor, muerto regresiva inducido por hongos, una sequía crónica que está ahora en su séptimo año. Desafortunadamente, ahora tendré que cambiar al inglés porque aquí es donde terminarían las clases de español de Natalia. I'm sorry, I cannot go longer in Spanish. It's the best I can do. I need more lessons.
Yeah, I get that.
So I am going to talk about the response of chaparral to California's changing climate, something that's affecting all of us globally, and definitely in California right now. So this is our vegetation, our dominant vegetation on our campus in the natural landscape, and you can see the response is not good. 62% of these individual plants are dead, totally dead. Those that are alive are only alive because of resprouting. There, there, and here we're measuring the physiology of the plants. So chaparral, in our system, there are two main types or categories of chaparral. Those that cannot sprout after wildfire or disturbance, Ceanothus megacarpus, a co-dominant in the vegetation, or sprouters that vigorously sprout after wildfire, and this is Ceanothus spinosus and Melasma lorina. We're going to look at these three varieties. To show you a picture of these two types, this is after a wildfire, about 6 months after fire. And this is Ceanothus megacarpus. There's no root crown. It is a non-sprouter. And this plant will be eliminated from this population if the seeds don't germinate and the seedlings establish. In contrast, right here, this is a vigorous resprouter. I call it a champion resprouter. Every individual that burns will sprout. And 1 week after the fire, their little leaves come out. It's impressive. And I call it the champion of resprout success because 100% of these vigorously sprout. So this root crown right here is often 3 meters in diameter, and it's just like a potapus. And it's got carbon in that root crown, 3 meters, 4 meters in diameter, and those sprouts come up immediately after fire. In contrast, there is no root crown on Ceanothus megacarpus. So when you look at the landscape, there's Melasma lorina, Ceanothus megacarpus. This is a picture of the natural landscape of our campus. And so students like Natalia and Vídeo goes out of the dormitory and they're in the chaparral and they're studying this. This is one of our preserves right on campus. And what you see are the 3 dominant species. Here is the Melasma lorina with large leaves. This is Ceanothus spinosus in the middle. And this is Ceanothus megacarpus, all with white flowers. Those are the 3 dominants in the landscape. So what's interesting, extremes, these grow side by side. So here's the big leaf Melasma lorina, and here's the real small leaf Ceanothus megacarpus, and there are other varieties in between, but these are the extremes. And we like biodiversity, genetic diversity. And it's amazing. They are very, very different in their physiological strategy, and yet they co-dominate. They're not alike, they're different, but those strategies allow them to persist, continue, and to exist in this habitat. So let me just pause a minute. I hope to convince you this one is very deep-rooted, over roots greater than 13 meters in depth. This one is very shallow-rooted, rooting depth less than 2 meters. This one is very susceptible to dehydration and will die. The seedlings die. 99% mortality of seedlings during the summer. This one is the champion of dehydration tolerance. 60% of the seedlings survive after wildfire during the dry summer. So everything about these plants are very different, and yet they co-dominate the landscape, showing great genetic variation and physiological variation. So if you were standing right here, it would look like this. And what's interesting, the plants in the chaparral are impenetrable. You can't easily walk, you crawl through the chaparral. They're the same height, but is the rooting depth the same? And the first ecologists to describe chaparral, they said they all have deep roots. But do they? And one way to test that idea is to measure the water status of the plants throughout the growing season. So in California, we have 6 to 9 months with no rain. This year, 10 months. So all summer, June, July, August, September, October, no rain is drier, drier, and drier. And here are your 3 species. This is Ceanothus megacarpus. It goes down to -8 megapascal. This is very dry. How dry? A corn plant, a bean plant, an elm tree is in trouble. 2, 3. These plants go way down -8 megapascal. Notice, are they all alike? This one, Melasma lorina, never goes below 2 megapascal. This one goes to -8. This one's intermediate. By the way, this plant, for a flowering plant, is the champion of dehydration tolerance. And it can go all the way down -10, -11, and it starts to die around -12. It's an incredible plant as far as the physiology. So here we go. Makes sense. This plant's down here. This one's up there. And yet they co-dominate the landscape. So that's an indirect estimate of rooting depth. We wanted to see, is it real? So we went out and we tried to dig a hole under the Melasma lorina right there. And we got down here at about 5 meters. And in his hand, the roots that big around. So then we went to landslides, road cuts, after major storms. And we saw roots that big at 13.4 meters. So Melasma lorina goes below 13.4 meters. Then we excavated these plants, and none of them got below 2 meters. So this is shallow rooted, and the Melasma lorina is deep rooted, side by side. So the rooting depth, the height is the same, but the rooting depth is very different. So we wanted to test just how dehydration tolerant these stems are. So when you look at a plant like this, what happens is the stomata open, the plant uses water during the day, transpiration, and the roots try to supply the water as fast as it's used. But there's a problem. The plant's using a lot of water, so the water in the xylem comes under tension, negative pressure. And after 6 to 9 months, hot, sunny California, always sunny, the tension gets higher and higher and higher. And there's a risk, because if that negative pressure, that tension is high enough, it will suck an air bubble into it. That's called air seeding. And that bubble is a problem for the plant, because the bubble is a physical blockage of water flow from the roots to the leaves. And if it gets high enough tension, negative enough pressure, more and more bubbles, more and more blockage, and it dies. And it's unambiguous when it dies, because what you do is you measure the hydraulic flow, the water flow, and as it gets drier and drier, the flow goes down, 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 and then it will die. And that's unambiguous dehydration tolerance of what this plant can withstand as far as lack of water, dehydration. So the way we do that, we take the stem, we cut it off underwater, big long branches. Underwater we cut, so no air bubbles. We take the stems, and then we have an IV bottle of elevated water reservoir. The water comes down, goes through that stem, or that stem, or that stem, and then it goes up onto a balance, and the mass goes up. That's the mass flow rate, or water flow rate. With a stopwatch, we measure the water flow rate through the stem. That's hydraulic conductance. And we write it down, we record it, okay? Now what we do is interesting. We turn this off, we turn another valve under high pressure. High pressure, and if there are any bubbles in there, it's going to blow the bubbles out. And you can look at the tube, and you see there, whoa, there are bubbles coming out. So you know there were air bubbles in that stem. So you blow the bubbles out for maybe 1 hour. Then you come back and you measure it again. And when you measure it the second time, the flow goes up. And so you say, oh, that's the percent loss of hydraulic conductivity. That's the percent of blockage of those conduits due to the air bubbles in the stem. And then the next thing you do is you take the branch here, and you just lay it on the desktop, and you wait 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, maybe 6 or 7 days. And then it gets really dry. You measure the water status, and then you cut the stem underwater, and you do this, and you can get a whole dry down curve, a dehydration curve. And we call that a measure of the vulnerability to xylem cavitation and embolism blockage. It's a whole curve. So I'm going to show you, this is one of my students doing a vulnerability curve on those 3 chaparral species, and this is the results. So here we see it. This is the water potential, -2, 4, 6, 10, 12, -14, dangerous. You got a pressure chamber, this is high pressure. And then this is percent of loss of conductivity. No blockage, 100% blockage. So 100% loss of conductivity means that plant has to die. It'll probably die around 80 to 90. Okay? So notice, are all the 3 plants alike? They're different, okay? This one, Melasma is very susceptible. This one, Ceanothus megacarpus, is very resistant, and it agrees sort of with what else we know about this plant. There's Melasma, there's Ceanothus megacarpus, they're codominants, they're growing side by side, different rooting depth, and different susceptibility to cavitation and embolism. Isn't physiology wonderful? You learn something. And what happens is, what's amazing about science is, you have this preconceived notion and idea, that's the way it works. You go out and you measure it, and you say, whoa, the data's different than what I thought. I just learned something here. And that's exactly what I did at Pepperdine. Because I sent students out of the dorm, they went up and measured these things, and they came and I said, that can't be right. Maybe I'm learning something here. Because what it says in the books, in the literature, in the textbook, chaparral all have deep roots. Chaparral have the same strategy, very resistant leaves, etc., etc. And what the students and I found at Pepperdine, that doesn't square with the data. So we start to think different, like Steve Jobs and Apple and all that same thing. Okay. So remember this up here? Look at that. That makes good sense. You can take this data and you can correlate with that. You can take this data and correlate with that. And the physiology makes sense. And so you become a believer in this. So I want to talk about the response of chaparral to California's changing climate. And in California, it's dry all summer, 8 to 9 months. During the winter, it rains, and the wettest month of the year is February. That's the wettest month, and that's when I took this picture. And you recognize anybody in this picture? Yeah, okay. And do our plants look very good? So there are 11 species of chaparral, and we were able to compare all 11 species at this one site in response to acute drought, a short period drought in the winter of 2014. And the only problem with this whole study was the hair. And what happens is, remember, chaparral, impenetrable, you got to get down and crawl through it, it's too dense. The hair, it's always got sticks in it. And I told Martin, I'm not coming out with you again unless you do something with that hair. So he got this, bandana, and he tied it down, and it worked. Because I'm going to show you some data, and we did 256 observations crawling through, and he had to fix that hair, and it worked. So if you know Martin, you know what I know. So here's the data. Here are the 11 species of chaparral. Here is the adult mortality. No mortality, 100% mortality. And what's amazing about this, notice, Ceanothus spinosus, that's one of our ceanothuses. Ceanothus cuneatus, it's just like Ceanothus megacarpus. And then here, Melasma lorina. And notice, are they all the same? Do they respond the same to acute drought? And the answer is no, something's going on here. And this is really embarrassing. I predicted the opposite. This one's real resistant to cavitation and embolism. It's a champion. That one's real resistant to cavitation. It's, you know, it's an unambiguous measure of dehydration tolerance. 93% mortality. 70% mortality. Now the one real susceptible is this one down here, Melasma lorina. That one's real susceptible to cavitation and embolism. 1.5% mortality. Surprise, surprise. And you're learning something about the patterns in nature, how the ecosystem functions, how it evolves. These are natural plant communities. And so the data are speaking to you, and there's something to be learned. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why these die and those don't? It's not cavitation and embolism. That's my cavitation and embolism. What's the real reason in this case, do you think? Any guess? Nobody wants to guess?
Someone said rooting depth. I heard it.
What? Who said it?
Someone back there, rooting depth.
Rooting depth. Somebody back there. See? Bingo! This one has deep roots. These two have shallow roots. When you have an acute drought, rooting depth is everything. So you always got to interpret data, and this is a natural event, and you learn something about how ecology works, and physiology is a great tool. If you want to look at more physiology, here is from that data. We took that data, and we just measured the water potential at midday. Here it's hydrated. There it's -10, -14, really dry, megapascal. And then this predicts mortality. No mortality, 100% mortality. And what you see is by measuring water potential, the ones with high mortality, -12, -14. So they're dying due to cavitation and embolism. It's this. This is why they're dying. Okay? It's pretty obvious. If you do dark adaptive fluorescence, this is a measure of the health of the chloroplast in the leaves. And you can do this in about 5 seconds. Fluorescence of the leaf. How healthy are the chloroplasts? Here's healthy, 0.8. Here's dead. And notice it predicts adult mortality. But the most important one is this one right here. This case of S, that's a hydraulic conductivity. That's how the water is flowing through the stem. It's a measure of water flow through the stem. And here is pretty high, 1.8, 0.6. Here it's just a trickle, barely flowing because of cavitation embolism. And here we see high mortality. So it looks like it's due to cavitation and embolism, and that's the explanation. So this is a drone. This is the bird's eye view. This is our calibration square. And that right there, can you see that? That's Martin venturis. And this is our 11 species. And that's where the study was done. Okay, we're back to our first picture. And we're going to talk about chaparral decline. 1985, that's the picture. Exact same location, 2018. I took this 2 weeks ago. Does it look the same? It does not look the same. And what has happened is this one has dropped out of the system because the fires came too quick with climate change. Fire frequency is once every 25 years. Now it's once every 7 years. This burned in 1985, 1993, 1996, 2007. We're ready for another one. Oh no. And this one is a non-sprouter. It lost its seed bank. It's gone. This one is very susceptible to dehydration and drought. I showed you that. Ceanospinosis, 93% mortality. So over 80% is gone. But this one, thank goodness. Melasma lorina, deep-rooted, big root crown. It's a champion of resprout success. It's invincible. It's immortal. It's going to be out there no matter what. At least we'll have some type of chaparral shrub up on that hillside, right? Now, I know this is hard to see, but this picture, you'll see there's brown here. Just trust me. There's brown there, brown there, brown there, brown there, brown, 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 brown. What is happening, this is brand new. It started in December of 2017 and has grown in January and February, the wettest part of the year. What has happened is a fungus has gotten in, and the fungus is now starting to degrade it. Okay, this is higher elevation, higher rainfall. If you look down low elevation, where it's drier, 62% mortality. Where this is no mortality, but it's just beginning, and it doesn't look good. Would you like to see what it looks like down there? Would that be helpful? This is what it looks like. That's Martin Ventura's. And this is our campus in the background. That's where Natalie's laboratory is right there. Natalia Ventura's laboratory. Okay, I'm just going to briefly introduce the next segment, which deals with what caused the death and dieback of our champion, our immortal, our invincible melasma rhina. And this is what it's starting to look like. This is what it should look like. And what causes this dieback, we thought maybe initially, my bias, water stress-induced cavitation embolism, or could it possibly be a blockage of the xylem due to a fungus or something else? So this was my initial thought, okay? So it went from here to here, and what causes that? We actually could measure the water potential of the control, blue, versus the dieback, the orange, and they were very different. The dieback at midday was down here at -3 megapascal, and this is the turgor loss point. This is where the plant loses turgor based on pressure volume curves. And it looks like it's bad, so it might be killing the plant. We don't know. So one way to test, is it dehydration directly, an embolism, or is it a fungus getting in, is to double stain the stem. So what we did a cross-section through the stem, and we double stained it. Initially, we stain it with a red stain, and then we blow out the air emboli, and then we come back and we stain it with a blue stain. And here's our control, no fungus, a healthy control plant. And almost all the xylem stains, there's about 3% that doesn't stain, so that's 3% solid blockage. In contrast, here's a fungus growing in this plant. It's a dieback plant. And here's the red, not much. And then the blue is the embolism. And we have all of this is physical blockage, 65% physical blockage. If you measure the embolism, there's no difference. 40% here and 40% there. So I was wrong. It's not cavitation, water stress-induced cavitation embolism. It looks like it might be a fungus. Okay? And so here are the hypotheses that we set up. And this was actually Natalie's work, Natalie's idea. And so I'm going to introduce her hypotheses. And since she did the work, I'm going to have her come up and explain the results, okay? And so hypothesis 1, the cause of this observed dieback is chronic drought, predisposing melasma rhina to fungal infection and spread. And so the idea is this is not acute drought. This is long-term drought, 5 years. It gets drier and drier for a long time. Therefore, the plant is closing the stomata. The plant is not as much photosynthesis, not as much carbon. It can't block off the fungus. Number 2, it's lower water status, lower water potential. Its phloem can't move the carbon to block the fungus. And thirdly, it suppresses the immune system. They have an immune system too. So all three are an operational, was the idea on this. Number 2, we applied Koch's postulate that will elucidate which fungus was causing it. And the idea is in every case of the disease, we find a fungus. If we take that culture and put it back into a healthy plant, it causes the symptoms. And then if we take the tissue from that new culture, we find the same fungus. So that's what we did, what Natalie did. And then number 3, we argued that hypothesis was that both water starvation, non-irrigation, and carbon starvation will enhance the growth of the fungal pathogen. So you inoculate the fungus, you measure its growth over time, and if you don't irrigate, it grows more. If you rip the leaves off, it grows more, carbon starvation, okay? And then lastly, we want to show what actually kills the plant. And people in the United States debate it. They don't know why a plant actually dies. But if your hypothesis is the dehydration tolerance of the pathogen, the fungus, will exceed the dehydration survival limits of the host, then it shows the fungus can actually kill the host. So you remember this? We know embolism, where that dies, that's the survival limit of the host. Can the fungus do better? And Natalie tested that hypothesis. Okay, I'm going to switch over to Natalie because...
¿Tengo que poner esto? No, vale. Voy a tratar mi mejor porque estoy muy nerviosa. Pero bueno, y lo voy a hacer en inglés. Yeah, they asked me that.
I didn't understand the Spanish.
Okay, primero, well, I'll start off in English. So the first hypothesis that we had was that acute drought wasn't going to kill off these plants, and that we needed a long chronic drought period for the plants to be affected by the fungus and also by the drought that's affecting most other plants in California. And so what we did with melasma was we took 10 different locations across 10 kilometers in the Santa Monica Mountains. So right here at number 7, this is where Pepperdine University is and where the lab is that I come from. And we took 10 different study sites, both at low elevation and at higher elevation. So at low elevation, looking at this precipitation map, you can see that in the red area, a lot less rain falls, so the plants are naturally drier. Whereas in higher elevations, rain is falling more consistently and staying in the underground layer. And the sites are, for the most part, have a lot more water. So what we did was score these plants. This is what a healthy plant should look like. And here are my little legs down there. So they're pretty big and always have a bunch of leaves. These leaves are evergreen and should never fall. And then we scored a plant with 0 if it was looking like a dieback plant and had no leaves on it. So it was completely dead. And then this was the range in between. And what we found was that at higher elevations, plants were looking pretty good, closer to 5, very healthy. Whereas at lower elevations, plants were getting to 0.5, so practically dead. I mean, there was one little leaf hanging on, and that one was considered still alive. So this was consistent all throughout the Santa Monica Mountains, with the exception of this 1.5 here, which the population looks pretty bad. And if we look at the map, you can see that this dry area comes up into the higher elevation sites. And that's consistent with percent plant mortality. At higher elevations with a lot of water, there's 0% mortality. Whereas on campus, like Dr. Davis said earlier, we're seeing up to 62% of this chaparral species alive, which is pretty sad because a lot of the other chaparral are doing really bad. They've dropped out due to fire frequency or the drought. And so this was like the last chance for that, the hillside to keep its chaparral and not become grassland or something like that. And percent plant fitness, we measured that using percent flowering, and just again, in higher elevations for the most part, the plants are doing pretty good. So it's this chronic drought, this law of dry period that's causing large percent mortality. And to test this in a field and a lab setting, we did an acute drought chamber experiment where we withheld water. We didn't irrigate for 1 week. And we did a similar experiment out in the field with a lot more plants where I withheld water for a few months. And what we see is that, we inoculated each of these plants with the fungal pathogen Bactriosphaeria Botreosphaeria, eso es, Deuteria. Then we measured the fungal elongation in millimeters per week. So this is the amount of growth. It grows really fast and easy to measure. And with an acute drought, we didn't see any difference between the water, the sequía, the plants that didn't get water, and the control. However, in the chronic drought, we saw a major difference between how well the fungus can grow in these plants that are water stressed or given a lot of water. So this led us to Koch's postulate and actually retrieving the fungus from the field. And what we were able to see was that in dieback plants, so a dieback plant is something that we're calling not completely dead, but dying. So we were able to remove this pathogen, this fungus, from 100% of every individual that we saw symptoms from. And then this was at the point of the canker, so it's a canker fungus, causes a canker in the bark. And then 85% of the time we were able to remove the fungus distal and 45% proximal. And then in every well-irrigated control plant or plant that received plenty of water, we weren't able to retrieve the fungus at all. So knowing that the fungus was in the plant, we thought, well, how is it affecting the hydraulic conductance? So Dr. Davis over here created this fancy method with a toilet plunger. How do you say toilet plunger? Como tupidor de inodoro? Yeah, and so aquí se ve el tupidor como opposite. And we are pouring water right here into this fancy toilet plunger to cut underwater. And this is the same picture you saw before. However, I can't control 20 plants like in that picture. I do one at a time. And the water just flows from a higher elevation down onto the balance and allows me to read the hydraulic conduction, hydraulic flow through the plant. And what we see is that at the point of the canker, there's no flow. Barely any flow through, so water is not being transported. And distal to that, which is why all of these leaves are dying, water is not getting that way either. However, proximal, it's reduced compared to control, but the plant is able to, for water to flow through. So to finish off Koch's postulate, we wanted to make sure what fungus we actually had, and use 3 primers to find the genetic match to the fungus Bactriosphaeria deuteria. And now we use this sample for the rest of the experiments that I'll go through really quick. So the third hypothesis was to distinguish between how a plant dies. So is it the lack of water, so water starvation or drought, or is it the plant being starved of carbon? And how I was able to distinguish this in a potted experiment was simply not water plants in the non-irrigated treatment or cut off the leaves in the defoliated treatment. And this forced the plant to produce more leaves at the top using the carbon stores in its roots. And I would constantly be trimming those off so that it was forced to deplete the carbon in the roots. And then I inoculated with a piece of agar here with the fungus directly into the xylem and closed that with parafoam because these plants were kept outside. So what we see is that here you have the water potential at midday, and here is the months that I performed the experiment. It took me a while to dry down the plants enough for it to be a chronic drought and not that acute drought that we were talking about. However, it matched what we see in the field, that the plants, the non-irrigated, the ones without any water, were reaching down towards -4 megapascals, which this is exactly what we were seeing in the field, that the plants are getting close to -3 and -4 megapascals. And I performed a vulnerability curve to find out the limit at which the plant dies, and Melasma lorena dies completely at -4 megapascals. So it's a good thing I didn't dry down the plants any longer because they would have died completely. But this just shows that the photosynthesis, these plants that are water stressed, because I can't take photosynthesis measurements on the carbon starve since I cut off the leaves. The plants were both closing their stomata, not producing these mobile sugars that could be used to block off this infection that I introduced. And so they were being starved of carbon and water, the plants that are water starved. And this just matches the photosynthesis that we see in the dieback, the red here in the field. So the plants in the field are never having a photosynthesis measurement higher than about 4 or 5. So I was happy with that in my potted experiment. And then to test this difference between the water starvation treatment, so the drought treatment, and the carbon starvation, with the fungal infection, this is the point where I inoculated the fungus. And all I did simply was peel back the bark enough to expose the xylem. And you can actually visually see with, with these glasses. I knew it was coming, and I knew it. So I was able to see really clearly the length of the fungal growth throughout the xylem, because this pathogen does grow in the cambium and the xylem. And what we found is that the irrigated plants are pretty well capable of slowing down the growth of the fungus. However, the carbon-starved group, which was also irrigated, did better or the fungus was able to grow a lot more, significantly more than the irrigated. However, the water-starved group was both closing its stomata and not photosynthesizing, so it was carbon-starved as well as non-irrigated. So whatever carbon was in the roots wasn't being able to be mobilized and used to block off the fungus, which is how it grew so much. And then lastly, this we wanted to talk about because it's what I have proposed to Juanan to study here with the elms and the pathogen that affects the graphiosis. And so basically what we did was take these stem segments that are very healthy, there shouldn't be any fungus in them, and we inoculated with the fungus the same way that I did before and measured the same growth, the fungal elongation per week. And what we see is that as I dry down these stems to -4 or -5 megapascal, past where the plant can survive, it completely dies at -4, the fungus is still growing. And so in the literature, it's thought that the fungus actually can't grow too much because it needs water in its environment to be able to grow. However, these are growing at an environment, at a cellular environment, much lower than the plant can survive. So, do you want me to just finish the conclusions?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, with this specific instance with melasma mariana, dieback is not caused by water stress, air embolism, but by actually some kind of physical blockage, whether that's the fungus itself in the xylem or the plant producing some kind of defense to keep the fungus from growing and blocking off its own xylem. And then the ultimate cause of dieback is chronic drought, not acute. And both water and carbon starvation affects the length of the fungus growing in the potted plants and plants in the field. And then most importantly, the dehydration tolerance of the fungus. So the fungus can grow at dehydration levels way past where the plant can survive.
Thank you. I like to just finish, this is the last slide, but the point of all of this is, isn't this a wonderful situation where someone from Madrid, Spain, Martin Venturas, comes all the way to Malibu, California, and works in my lab, and we look at the response of chaparral to climate change, increasing fire frequency, and drought, and we learn quite a bit together. And so here is Martin Venturas. Here's our campus in the background. And this is actually the building right there. That's our laboratory. That's where Natalie did all of her work. But this is what the dominant vegetation is looking like at low elevation and low rainfall. And at this site, it's 62% mortality. Last year, it was only 52% mortality. The year prior to that, it happened to be 42% mortality. It's going down, down, down. And worse than that, now way up higher on the mountain, they're newly infected. So we're really concerned about this impact of climate change and even the champion of reef sprout success. The immortal, the invincible melasma rhina is having trouble. And I'd like to just say that we've had NSF support for this work, but also this is my physiology class. There's Natalie. And how Natalie got involved in this work is that she took this class and got hooked on melasma rhina. And they're all co-authors on this. And in addition, Natalie did summer research on a summer research grant. And then she's here in Madrid, Spain. We call it reciprocity, the exchange. Martin to us, Natalie to you all. So thank you very much. So we're open to any question you have, and you can do it in Spanish, you can do it in English, anywhere you want, because I got Natalie here. This is great.
I don't know.
So any type of question, we can handle it, especially with me.
We did a bad job.
So I'm going to tell a quick story. I'll make it real quick. I had a student, one of my first, I was very young, very naive, and she was nervous, about ready to give a talk, and I said, you have no reason to be nervous, because if you get to the end, and if there's no questions, that's when you're nervous, because it means I didn't understand. And so she went in, gave her talk, it was on stomata, okay, and she came to the end, and guess what? There were no questions. So what she says, come on now, I know there's some questions out there. We're talking about something important here. We're talking about stomata. And the hands went up. So that's what we expect now.
Okay, I can ask anyway. So, back to your study, do you think that can you go back again to your predisposing factors? And do you think, because the predisposing factors related to drought are there, do you think that without the fungus, the species would survive still much longer? Or what do you think? So do you think that is more important the actual factor like the fungus or the predisposing factors in carbon mortality?
Great question. I think I understood. Correct me if I'm wrong. This fungus is normally always there. It's in most of the chaparral shrubs. Botryosphaera dothidia is very common. It's an endophyte. They coexist, and they've done this, evolved that way. So there's normally no problem. But in the case of melasma rhina, you have a very big root, 40 feet down, 13.4 meters, and you got to continually keep the root alive. So you're putting carbon, and now you have drought 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years of drought. And this normal fungus, normally there, becomes a pathogen. We call it an opportunistic pathogen. It's not normally a pathogen. So it's the chronic, to answer your question, I think it's the chronic drought. What do you think, Natalie?
Chronic drought.
You want to say it in Spanish?
I don't know if I
You
can.
agree with me?
Yes, I agree with you.
You don't have to, right?
Yeah, no.
She knows she doesn't have to agree because, you know, anyway.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm right on that one.
Sí.
Thank you for the great talk. So I wonder what could it be done at the forest management level for improving this situation? Is there anything we could do with respect to cutting down emissions and so forth? What could it be done?
Well, that data that Natalie showed was the entire Santa Monica mountain range, and it's the same throughout at low rainfall, and now it's getting to higher elevation, high rainfall. So hopefully Natalie can learn from you to answer your question, because I think the only hope is maybe somewhere to find a resistant strain and to somehow revegetate. And we have not, we've looked, not very carefully because this is new to us. We're physiologists. We're not pathologists. But, so what do you think, Alan?
I've learned a lot since being here about how not every individual in the population responds to graphiosis the same. And that would be the strategy, to repopulate the population or the mountainsides out there with a plant that can still tolerate water stress the way this one does, and cavitation and embolism, but also be really strongly able to defend itself against this pathogen in particular.
One problem with Melasma lorina, most of its seedlings die due to drought. 99% die. Therefore, these plants are very old and they form a big clone. So my point is not a lot of genetic variation. And so that's not a good sign. Whereas the other species, Cenos and megacarpus, every fire, all the genes are shuffled. Total genetic variety, and therefore great genetic diversity. So that's not in the right.
I will say one thing. That's a really important question about how we can keep these plants alive on the hillside. And if you saw the pictures, all the students that go to this school are very lucky because we live in Malibu with all the movie stars. Esto lo puedo decir en español. Entonces, esta escuela está localizado en una ciudad muy rica y en un lugar que hay personas que tienen mucho dinero. Entonces, quieren que la montaña se quede ahí y no encima de sus casas, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que la única razón por que ellos le importan este trabajo es porque como tienen las roots, gracias, que llegan tan para abajo y que van y aguantan muy fuerte el suelo. Entonces ellos están muy preocupados porque ya están casi todos muertos y en unos años, no sé cuántos, pero eso da mucha preocupación. Y además, esta gente rica crece sus propias uvas para hacer vino y este hongo también afecta al vino. Entonces, tengo dos razones por qué ellos quieren y me invitan a hablar de cosas. No es para con distancia hidráulica, sino para cómo siguen sus vinos y sus casas vivas. Entonces, eso es muy interesante y puede ser que en otro sitio en California no le importan, que se van todas las plantas y...
Did you tell about erosion?
Yeah.
Okay. Muy bien.
When we talk about carbon starvation, are you measuring carbohydrates?
Yeah, we measured non-structural carbohydrates out in the field within dieback plants and control plants. Remember? We did that at Bakersfield. But there wasn't that much of a difference within the control. And so we also did iodine staining. And you can see a big difference within the starch available in cross-sections. But we didn't pick that up, at least in the field, using the carbon-nitrogen balance. And so I didn't do it in the potted experiment.
So it's very, very tentative data, and probably in our situation the best is simple iodine stain and look at the amount of staining. It's simple, and we've done some of that, but not a lot. But it is in the right direction, but it's tentative data. It's preliminary data, but it is in the right direction. That's why we did the potted experiment. We liked the more general start.
So, do you think that the fungus need vessels to be cavitated actually to grow?
Oh, this is for me. I think that they need to be cavitated first. Esto lo puedo decir en español también. Entonces, yo le propuse propuse esta idea a él y él pensó que yo estaba loca, pero lo hice aunque él no quería. Entonces hice otro experimento como este. Hice un experimento como este, casi igual, pero solamente con sequía y agua, para ver si las vasos llevan agua. Y como lo podíamos hacer porque él tiene un estudiante que ahora trabaja como profesor y profesora en una escuela que se llama UCS Bakersfield, que queda en Bakersfield, California, y le dieron una máquina, aplicaron por una beca que podían comprar una máquina que toma una foto tridimensional de toda la porción de la planta que metes ahí adentro. Entonces mi pensamiento, que todavía esto no es analizado, es que se puede ver los dos, el hongo y los besos llenos de agua, y no, porque esa foto se hace con densidad. Y mi pensamiento es que el hongo necesita un vaso que ya está cavitado con aire para crecer, aunque el hongo necesita agua en su environment, pero no tengo esos datos. Entonces,
Well, I have a question for
Yeah.
you. Once you finish, I have a question for you.
I'm done.
Okay, I have a question for you. Did you tell them that Brandon and Anna were my former students?
Yeah.
And did you tell them that Martin Venturas was a postdoc in there?
No.
Tell
Entonces
them.
Martin, después de estar con él 6 meses, vivió con él y con Janet en su casa en Pepperdine. Fue a trabajar un año como postdoc en el laboratorio de Brandon y Anna, que son las que me dieron la oportunidad de poner estas plantas en esa máquina que se llama HRTC. Y era muy difícil con las fotos, aunque lo tengo, entonces si me puedes ayudar, lo agradezco si sabes algo de esto. Pero era muy difícil porque la densidad de agua y del hongo es muy similar, aunque se ve todo. Y además, algo que es curioso, que no me acuerdo ahora, what's it called when the plant puts
Resin?
inside of the vessels?
Oh, tylosis.
Tylosis. Se ve perfecto, entonces si lo quieres ver, te enseño. Pero ya, estoy en eso.
Una más. Did you tell them that Martin Venturas is now in John Sperry's lab?
Ok, entonces, quieren que saben que Martin todavía está en los Estados Unidos trabajando con un señor que se llama John Sperry. Creo que ustedes pueden saber eso. Y es por Martin y por Luis que me aceptó y me dio esta oportunidad que esté aquí compartiendo todo esto.
So I just want to say that everything that I learned about how to measure cavitation, embolism, hydraulic conductance, etc., was all learned from John Sperry. And Martin Venturas now is a postdoc in John Sperry's lab. So it's a small world.
Si tienen otras preguntas, estoy aquí hasta el verano. I'm here until summer.
So we're done?
Yeah.
Okay, good.